All right, good afternoon, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Glad that you could join us here on a Wednesday afternoon. And welcome to our November Town Hall meeting. I'm Bill Sheridan. I am the Chief Communications Officer with Maryland Association of CPAs. Normally, you would be seeing and hearing from our CEO, Rebecca Olson. She is at a conference this week and couldn't be with us, so I'm stepping in her place today. Wanted to say welcome, glad you're here. Let's get right into it, shall we? Next slide. You should all be familiar with this process here. Conferences.io, it's our audience participation tool for those of you who are new to it. We're going to have some polling questions that we push out here in a few minutes. Most of those polls should be open, so if you're in there already, feel free to go ahead and answer those questions. There's also a Q&A component, so if you have questions as the hour goes along, feel free to post your questions there. Normally, we like to start with good news, right? What's good in your world? We feel that that's just a great way to kick off any meeting. But with Thanksgiving just about a week away, thought we'd change that just slightly and ask you what you're thankful for this year. So go ahead and put that in there, a little pre-Thanksgiving celebration of the things that we are grateful for this year. Some other questions, the usual, where do you work, your role, top challenges that you're facing, things of that nature. Feel free to answer those questions. We're going to show some of those polling results here in just a moment. I want to move on quickly to our preferred providers. We couldn't bring you content like this without the help of our preferred providers, and we like to think of these folks as partners. These are the relationships, the partnerships that help us do so many of the things that we do for you. And they really, truly are partnerships, right? These folks are doing things that we think can help you become a little bit more future ready and thrive in this ever-changing world. And help really is the key word. They truly, truly do want to help. So please feel free to reach out to them and find out more about what they can do and how they can help you. You'll find out more about all of our preferred providers on our website. That's macpa.org. And actually, today's town hall is sponsored by one of our preferred providers. That's CPA Charge, and they are with us today. We actually have Ashton Barksdale from CPA Charge. Ashton, there you are. You popped in just at the last minute. Ashton is with CPA Charge. She's going to say a few words to you for just a couple of seconds. So Ashton, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks for being here.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. Happy Wednesday, everyone. Like Bill said, my name is Ashton Barksdale. I'm a relationship manager here at CPA Charge. We are proud to be partnered with MACPA. Hopefully you've heard about us. If not, totally fine. CPA Charge is a simple, affordable online payment solution that allows accountants, bookkeepers, CPAs, and enrolled agents to easily and securely accept credit, debit, and e-check payments in person, online, or on the go. From multiple easy ways to get paid to reporting and reconciliation features, top-notch data security, CPA Charge offers the features and functionality accounting professionals need to succeed with all the competitive rates, no long-term contracts, setup fees, or cancellation fees. One more thing to note. We are actually running a promo right now. So if you do open a new CPA Charge by 11/24, you're going to get that program fee waived for 9 months. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out to me. It's just abarksdale@cpacharge.com. I hope you'll have a great rest of your week and a wonderful holiday. Thank you very much, Bill. On to you.
All right, Ashton, thanks again. And thanks for being here for CPA Charge's continued partnership. Much appreciated. Polling questions. Let's take a look at some of the things that you've been putting in here really quick. Some of the things that you're thankful for this year. Opportunities, family comes up over and over again. Close to retiring. Congratulations on that. Hopefully finishing the CPA exam this month. Good luck on that. Alive and well. Yes, I had somebody, I read a report from Gary Vaynerchuk, actually, one of the thought leaders that I follow online. He said, I think he posted something to the effect of, if you woke up today and everybody that you know is healthy and happy, then it's going to be a good day. So that's a great way of looking at it. Your first grandchild this year, congratulations. Your golden retriever. I'm a big dog person myself, so I had to call that one out as well. And my dog, there's another dog there. Just so much to be thankful for this year. Thank you for sharing that, and best wishes on a very, very happy Thanksgiving coming up. Some other polling questions. A quick look at where you work. The print here is very small, but it looks like sole practitioners are leading the way here, followed by public accounting firms. That's fewer than 25 Maryland team members on the team. We also have quite a few folks from private companies, nonprofits, a lot of retired folks on the call today as well. Welcome, and a few students as well, I believe, are here. So welcome to everybody, and thanks for being here. Your position or level at work. Here's just a quick snapshot of the folks who are on the call with us today. A good kind of cross-section of the profession with us, as always. We also threw this in here as well. What are your top 3 professional challenges over the last 6 months? We always like to get a good feel of what you're dealing with, what kind of things are getting in your way or presenting some challenges at work. Right now, it looks like the need for new skills, upskilling and reskilling, vastly important in the world that we're living in today. Just to stay on top of that. Finding talent, obviously, is always near the top of our challenges. The regulatory complexity and maintaining that culture and a hybrid workforce. And then the rest of them, you see them kind of jockeying for position there. You'll all get copies of these slides at the end of the presentation. So you can kind of see for yourself where everyone fell in terms of the top challenges. So please keep answering those questions. There are some other polling questions that we haven't gotten to yet that we hopefully will touch on at the end of the presentation. But please, if you haven't, go ahead and answer those questions so that we can get your input into all of this. But right now, we want to turn it over to our guest today, who is with us from Towson University. Dr. Darius Irani is with us and is going to give us an economic update. So Dr. Irani, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to turn it over to you. It looks like we got a packed agenda. I want to give you as much time as possible, so please take it away.
Well, thank you. If you could put my slides up, that would be wonderful. So thank you for having me. I think some of you might have heard me at other presentations. I will say that data has changed as well as the theme of our presentation, but tragically the bad jokes still remain. Nevertheless, so let's just kind of dive right into to what's going on. So the theme, as you can probably tell, is AI, as AI has perhaps become one of the more newest and perhaps significant transformative technology in the last decade. And will probably likely change the economy. Now, I should state that the time of Skynet is still far off. We have ascribed a lot of technology and transformation to this juvenile technology, but it will, cause some changes in our economy. But that's far from the future. We are currently facing several headwinds. So the war in Ukraine is now approaching its second year. The conflict in Gaza could expand to a broader conflict in the Middle East. Continuing supply chain issues, though not as severe as they have been in the past. Workforce shortages, primarily driven by labor force participation rates, not recovering to pre-pandemic levels. Continuing inflation, though yesterday's news was good. CPI data came in at lower than anticipated. So we saw a huge run up in equities markets as basically traders felt that the next rise in interest rates may not be as soon. And again, rising interest rates, which up until now have been taming inflation, but there's been a bit of a pause. Climate change impacts, political challenges. I mean, so yesterday the House finally approved a continuing resolution through January for first half and then February for the second half. But nonetheless, it was still a bipartisan, but the majority of the votes were primarily Democrats. So there is still some division in the Congress, and the inability for Congress to actually do its job does create long-term challenges for our economy, as many issues facing the economy require ongoing governmental support. So any one of these could have a tremendous impact on the economy, and they have impacted the economy. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about, next slide. So gross domestic product, GDP, is the total market value of all goods and services produced in the U.S. in a given time period. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at the components of GDP on the expenditure side. We're looking at consumption expenditures, business investment expenditures, government expenditures, and then net exports. You can see from these data that GDP grew most recent data 4.9%, which was well above expectations. But more importantly, it was also well above the long-term average trend, which is somewhere between 2 and 3% annualized growth. So that it was a surprise to most economists, and also sort of does suggest that perhaps a recession is not as near or as imminent as some people have predicted earlier on this year. But given the superheatedness of the economy, some concern that maybe inflation will begin to heat up again. Next slide, please. So consumption is about 70% of GDP. We are a nation of see it, want it, buy it. We plan holidays around, Black Friday. We offer discounted hotel rooms. We offer bus tours. We are a nation that when there's tough times, we go shopping. And you can sort of see that generally consumers, in spite of rising interest rates, have continued to spend money on goods and services. And so how the household feels, so goes the economy. So if households feel confident about what's going on in the economy, they will continue to spend money. And now some of that money they're spending is the money they saved during the pandemic. They're sitting on over $1 trillion in additional savings. So that does mean they're a bit able to fuel their needs for the time being. Next slide, please. So business investment. Back one slide, sorry. So business investment, this is anything that a business or a manufacturer purchases to produce or provide a good or a service. So think about trucks, think about airplanes, think about factories, think about machines, think about shelves that go into a store. Those are all basically part of the business investment. Also think about in inventories. Think about also housing is also captured under this as well. So oftentimes we'll see this number tends to be a bit volatile, especially from fourth quarter to first quarter, as many firms run down their inventories, take advantage of the holiday season. Next slide, please. So government spending, we have seen a continued rise for the last 5 straight quarters. And again, it continues to go up. We are generating a tremendous amount of deficit this year. But also our long-term debt is about $30 trillion, which is a significant amount of dollars that we have. And we owe primarily to ourselves via treasury bills, but nonetheless, it is a bill that is going to come due. And as someone who grew up in the 80s and 90s, I recognize that the deficit spending has always been with us. But the concern has been is during those time periods, interest rates were fairly low, fairly high. So as the government borrowed more money, the amount available for discretionary spending actually decreased as the interest on that borrowing increased and caused a bit of a crowding out effect. That is also a concern as we raise interest rates now. As the government borrows additional dollars, those dollars come at an extremely higher price than they did, say, prior to March 2022. Next slide, please. You can sort of see that we have two recessions here, or two events. I was going to have the 2001 $400 rebate check that George W. Bush gave to us, but that was so small in comparison to the Great Recession fiscal stimulus, as well as the COVID stimulus. That basically it just wouldn't show up very well. But nonetheless, you can sort of see just how much stimulus was spent to basically address the issue of COVID, as well as the Great Recession, which, by the way, the Great Recession is the gift that is keeping on giving, I'll explain in several slides later. Next slide, please. The trade deficit net exports is exports minus imports. You can sort of see that we tend to import more than we export. Primarily, half of the goods coming in as imports are considered to be intermediate goods. That is to say, goods that are used in the production of final goods. So think about your tires on your domestically produced car. Think about the wipers, the wiper assemblies. All that can be sourced from other countries and then come together in Detroit or Kansas City or wherever the big three have their manufacturing facilities. All those goods that are imported are counted towards their imports, but generally speaking, we're not always importing Rolex watches, Rolls Royces, and Gucci bags. Next slide, please. Obviously, as I mentioned, the war in Ukraine going into its second year, it has disrupted numerous things across the country, across the world. Thinking about corn and wheat prices have gone up. Thinking about oil production have gone up. Fertilizer production has been reduced. World economic growth has been adversely impacted, has been downgraded by about 2.9 percentage points. So again, and Europe has been sort of more so again, its energy dependency on Russia has sort of caused a bit of a slowdown. Next slide, please. As you can sort of see, our unemployment and underemployment is the full red bar, and you can sort of see that number approached nearly 23% during the pandemic, with unemployment about 15%. Unemployment is characterized as those individuals who are actively looking for work in the prior week, divided by the labor force, and labor force is those who are employed. Plus those who are unemployed. Underemployment is a broader measure. It looks at basically not only individuals who are unemployed, but individuals who might be marginally attached to the labor force. So perhaps they've not looked as intensely, but also they might be willing to work full-time, but can only work part-time. Both those numbers have decreased rather rapidly, achieving post or pre-pandemic levels. Next slide. So the war in Ukraine, as I mentioned, has some challenges. Supply chain persists. Rents have increased in the rate of inflation, and gas prices have been rising, though they've been falling in the last several weeks. Next slide, please. To really address the rate of inflation, the Fed has raised the Fed rate about 10 times since March of 2022, going about 5.25%. A significant and a very aggressive, though they have paused most recent meeting not to raise inflation. And given the numbers that came in this past Wednesday, they may have further consideration in their next meeting. Next slide, please. So you can sort of see that inflation peaking in July of 2022, June or July of 2022, has come down significantly. Yesterday's CPI report showed that core was about 4.4%, and core excluding core including gas, or the broader measure was 3.1%, and excluding gas and energy was 4%. So we did see food prices continue to rise. Next slide, please. And you can sort of see compared to the rest of the country, Maryland, Baltimore County MSA is about the same as the rest of the country in terms of rate of inflation. Next slide, please. So pre-pandemic, you can sort of see this is an index that I've looked at, have used. You can sort of see that the zero line is sort of on normality. You can sort of see that when you go above the zero line, that sort of has the supply chain pressures that kind of go on. It kind of incorporates the purchasing managers index as well as some other data points. But you can see that basically how it peaked in post-pandemic, and then basically it has been dropping down, which sort of indicates that supply chain pressures have come down. And I believe that supply chain cannot be used as an excuse for anything anymore, given the fact that basically we are seeing declining pressures on that. Next slide. So for many consumers, every day they are reminded of how much gasoline costs. And in spite of the fact that in 2008, gas was running about $4 a gallon, they did the cash for clunkers and then decided, well, you know what, that those days are over. will go ahead and buy, continue to buy big Chevy Tahoes and other things. But that also meant that basically, when gas prices now rose to nearly $4 or $5 in some places, especially in California, people were using a second mortgage to fill up their gas tank every week. Nonetheless, it is, it has softened a bit, which also means, the consumers perhaps aren't as upset how the economy is going. Next slide. So here we're seeing inventory for cars again. It has dropped tremendously, but it is now beginning to slowly peak up. You can sort of see that the average car price rose about 30%. Average new car price is about 47,000. New cars under 30K on a dealer's lot was 8% post-pandemic versus 38% pre-pandemic. So 40% of the cars on a dealer's lot pre-pandemic were under 30,000. Cars over 70,000 were now 10% of the dealer's inventory versus 3% pre-pandemic. And new cars under 20,000 were 8% pre-pandemic, now under 1%. So basically what's happened, obviously, as the chip shortages continue to kind of plague cars, it takes about 100 chips for a car, a combustion engine car, and about 1,000 chips for an EV car. So for obviously car companies decide they want to go with the high margin cars. So the cars that you see on the lot tend to be the fully loaded cars and less of the bare bones model. Next slide. You can sort of see the consumer debt did drop during the pandemic, as many people couldn't go out, couldn't go on trips, but obviously has increased as we go forward. Some of that, again, if you look at new car vehicle loans, they're now 17% are $1,000 or more. Last quarter, that was 15%. So obviously, as people need to buy cars, those the car prices have gone up. So that's combined with an increasing interest rate, which basically means the cost of borrowing has gone up. So the note has gone up rather tremendously. Next slide. So consumer sentiment. Now, looking at this slide, 100 is sort of considered to be happy. You can sort of look at this goes to 2006. You can sort of see 2008. We had a dip in the consumer sentiment. Obviously, as people's homes, their number one asset, dropped in value tremendously, 30% in some cases. But you can see more remarkably that pre-pandemic, we had drama in politics. We had an impeachment. We had just all kinds of drama. People were pretty happy. Then the pandemic came. People were not so happy. They got to stay home. This might have tested the relationship with a significant other. They got a pet maybe, but they got to perhaps go to work in their pajamas from the bottom down, and then wore a suit on the top up. They got to order food, DoorDash. They got to order from Amazon. They got to order from Drizzly, which is a alcohol delivery company that is prominent here in Towson and other localities. Life was pretty good. Roads were pretty empty. They could go for walks. It was pretty good. So you can kind of see that during the pandemic, people were pretty happy, even happier than they were during the 2008. The economy, we get a vaccine, we begin to recover, we go back to work. All of a sudden, oh my God, now I have to go back to work. I have to drive into work. I have to pay more for gas because all of a sudden everyone came back to work, resulting in the fact that gas prices kind of had a bit of a spike. So every morning when you got out of the car, you looked at the gas station going, gosh, that's a lot of money for gas. Every week when you went grocery shopping, going, gosh, that's a lot of money for eggs. And so consumers became very unhappy. So you can sort of see, in spite of a pandemic, we were much happier during the pandemic than we were post-pandemic when we all got to drive home. So you can generally see that kitchen table issues do impact households more so than even a pandemic. So interestingly enough, next slide, please. So again, looking at home prices have fallen a bit, but again, when they've risen about 30 to 35%. When they drop 1%, it doesn't do much. We are in a housing supply deficit of about 5 million units in the U.S. Mortgage rates obviously increased. Go ahead, next slide, please. So you can sort of see that they've continued to go up. Now, for many of us who grew up in the 80s or were adults in the 80s, mortgage rates were about 12, 13, 14, 15%. So everyone now who is of that age goes, these millennials can't handle the heat. I had a 12%, 13% mortgage. Why are they whining? Anyway, nonetheless, when you come from an environment of almost a 0% interest rate, a very low interest rate environment, is a challenge because many people, are used to that. So obviously, you begin to see that's a great benefit, and they've never experienced a mortgage above 5%. Next slide. Obviously, we're seeing that the price of rent has increased faster than the overall cost, overall inflation in the U.S., which does mean that many individuals are finding themselves challenged to find affordable housing and not see, great increases. We are seeing some localities here in Maryland, especially Montgomery County, just has a rent cap, and that has sort of caused a bit of consternation. Howard County is proposing it. Other counties are kind of thinking about it. As an economist, we would argue that it's not a good idea. It has, laudable intentions, but it will have bad outcomes. Namely, you'll begin to see an underinvestment in rental housing. Renting a house or renting apartments is a risky business. Obviously, you run into individuals who may not pay their rent on time or at all. Individuals who perhaps don't treat the apartment as their home, but rather as a dumpster, resulting in that the landlord needs to go and do extensive repairs. So there's a lot of risk being a landlord, and many people don't factor in. And by capping the return on that on the investment, one sort of then says, well, you're assuming all the risk, but you're not getting much of the return. So I think there are other solutions that counties need to really think about regarding sort of increasing affordable housing. I don't think it needs to be on the burdens of landlords as doing that. Next slide. So mortgage originations have dropped, obviously, for many people. One of the challenges that we face is, if you're sitting on a 2.5% mortgage, and you were to sell your home, you'd have to get maybe a 4, 5, or 6% mortgage, which essentially means that it's gone up. So that is kind of a big challenge. So we're seeing basically a bit of a shrinkage of inventory on the market, and obviously individuals aren't going to do a refi because obviously this doesn't means that if you go from a 2.5% mortgage, you might go to a much higher mortgage rate. Next slide, please. So as I was saying, that the 2008 recession is the gift that keeps on giving, and you can sort of see that pre-2008. You can sort of see that we were probably producing, constructing about just over 2 million units of housing per year, and that dropped to just under 500,000 units per year, which is a significant amount of units that are not being built. And that continued for a while, which basically meant we were not building houses to accommodate the growth in population or the household formation. So many kids who graduated college in 2008, they probably came back, stayed with you for a little while in your basement, played Call of Duty. Generally speaking, tragically, their lifetime earnings will likely be about 20% lower than those kids who graduated in 2012. But nonetheless, they are now of household age formation. So now they're looking for homes. There's not enough homes. Next slide. So basically, based upon the fact that we didn't build houses during that little U shape during after 2008 recession, we ran about 2 to 6 million homes short. And again, this also causes the challenge of not enough rental units available, not enough supply. So what we're seeing, especially in our areas, are shortages in homes driven by supply, not necessarily by demand. So again, pre interest rates, we're seeing a lot of cash deals as companies, individuals are paying all cash for their homes, which also meant that for individuals who were borrowing for a home, it was rather challenging. Next slide. So this is something that continues to be a real challenge. So broadly speaking, in the U.S., foot traffic on cities is still about 25% lower than it was pre-pandemic. And some cities it's higher, some cities it's a bit lower. Office vacancies kind of continue to increase. We are seeing that this is having some continuing challenges. There are about just over $2 trillion in commercial real estate debt that's kind of out there, and about a quarter trillion of that will expire by the end of the year. Now, under normal circumstances, building owners would refi and kind of then go on their merry way. But now interest rates are much higher, so they might start walking away. We have seen that some mezzanine loans have actually gone into a default. So what they're saying is, for New York, for example, remote work could reduce New York City properties by over 40%, reducing tax revenue by 6%, which is significant. So taking that across, and so not only is it just the tax revenues for the building, but first floor retail is impacted. So your delis, your shoe shine, your dry cleaners. Although dry cleaners were struggling pre-pandemic, as many people went to the casual work attire. But nonetheless, anything first floor retail, newspaper stands, all those things have been impacted. But then also individuals who perhaps parking garages, which are sometimes funded by municipal bonds. Well, if not enough people are parking in those parking garages, that means that those municipalities are going to have a challenge meeting the note payment on those spaces. But also means that for commuters who take trains, again, the fare box may not be achieved. So there are a lot of challenges. Next slide. So one of the things is looking at all this perhaps underutilized vacant office space. Perhaps it could be repurposed in residential housing. So this one company looked at across the North America and found that basically there are some opportunities. So buildings built before 1990 and had a floor plate of about 15,000 square feet or less, were really could be something that could be converted into housing. But I will say, given the fact that housing is the cost of borrowing has gone up, and this is not a very easy solution to do, but it does remain an opportunity, and again, something to consider. Perhaps municipal money can kind of be put in there to kind of help address these issues. Next slide, please. So one thing I will say, and I think I did see it on the board, the challenge of hiring. It is pervasive across the board, across all industries. Everything from fully remote work. Some companies want their employees to be back in the office. Some employees say, nope, I don't want to be back in the office. Childcare continues to be a challenge. One of the bigger challenges we're facing is that we are not having enough babies to have a good source of population. And much of our source of population economic growth is likely to be immigration. Next slide, please. So you can sort of see immigration plummeted during the pandemic, but is bouncing back. Now, immigrants are not only individuals who have founded many of our Fortune 500 companies, have thrived in our communities, but they're oftentimes first generation will do what we consider to be the dirty, dull, and dangerous job that no one really wants. So thinking about work such as working agriculture, working in meat packing, crab pickers on the Eastern Shore, the types of jobs that many American citizens do not necessarily want. But many of these immigrants see these as opportunities. Many immigrants see this as an opportunity for their kids then to come here and actually enter into the American dream, go to college and get advanced degrees, and basically not have to work with their hands. But we are still facing that challenge. Next slide, please. And you can sort of see our birth rates are dropping. We are leading the world in terms of fewer babies. Obviously, the developing countries are actually having more babies than we have, and so basically that is going to be a ongoing challenge. Next slide, please. Net national immigration has actually picked up, so we're beginning to see that. That's good. Next slide, please. Job openings. We're seeing almost the number of jobs. So this again is number of job openings with unemployed. Unemployed, you actually have to be actively looking for work. You can't be in your basement playing Call of Duty and not looking for work. So you're looking for work and you're unemployed. You can sort of see there's probably just over or just under 2 jobs for every 1 person actively looking. Some of the challenges might be the mismatch of skills. So not everyone's, can find these jobs or can do these jobs. Other challenges are many employers want to pay less than market. And as a result, many individuals are saying no. Next slide. And similarly, in Maryland, you're saying the same thing in terms of the number of jobs. So, a little bit, smaller, but generally speaking, about 2 jobs for every individual. Next slide, please. Here again, quit rates. We have the Great Resignation, the Quiet Resignation, the Great Quit, all the things, but it has slowed down, which certainly is good news as many individuals look around and realize that they might have it better at their current job than they would at a new job. Next slide, please. So labor force participation rate is a measure. It is basically the labor force, which as I recall is a number of individuals who are employed plus individuals who are unemployed, divided by the population 16 and over. It typically won't be 100% because many individuals are stay-at-home spouses, are individuals who are primary caregivers, are in the military, are in school, are guests of the state or the federal government. So generally speaking, it's not going to be 100%. US around 63% pre-pandemic, Maryland just over 66%, 67%. Obviously, with the pandemic, many people were out of the labor force. They were still looking for work, but they dropped. So we dropped about 3.5 percentage points for Maryland. We've not really recovered since much. So for Maryland, this translates to about 100 to 130,000 missing workers. Now, and for the U.S., it's just around 1 million workers are missing. Now, what happened? So some individuals might have retired early. They cashed out, decided to move to Montana, Wyoming. They saw Yellowstone. They wanted to live that lifestyle. Many individuals decided that they only needed 1 income. That basically they instead of having 2 incomes, 1 income was sufficient. Tragically, we did see obviously an increase in mortality due to the pandemic, which resulted in fewer workers overall. So that is contributed. So there is a number of factors that are causing why we're seeing the labor force participation rate, remain low. For Maryland, it is particularly challenging given the fact that we were fairly industrious and we've not quite recovered, whereas the rest of the U.S. has actually seemed to be kind of trending up and almost to the point where it was pre-pandemic. Next slide, please. Prime age employment, which is 25 to 54, which probably encompasses most of us. That number has actually reached pre-pandemic levels. So generally speaking, we are, we've shouldered that burden. Next slide. Women have really helped us out. This looks at basically their participation rate versus men, 1980 to 2022. You can sort of see stereotypically blue is for men, pink is for women. The dotted lines are the 1980 participation rates, and the solid lines are 2022 across the different age categories. And you can sort of see that men were fairly, industrious in the 80s, era of big hair, padded suits, and big brick cell phones. But since then, we've actually cut back our work ethic. Again, perhaps there are more distractions. Perhaps, we've decided we would drop out. Nonetheless, we're seeing it across the board, with the exception of the old people, myself included, who are continuing to work and even increase their participation rates. Women, on the other hand, have actually tremendously increased their participation rates at all age categories, but even in particular, those individuals who are 55 and older, they have really, or 54 and older, excuse me, have really increased their participation rate. And again, the advent of childcare has really made it more possible. But many individuals, once they've achieved, once their kids have grown up and are 18, they're fully re-entering into the labor force. So this has been a tremendous success across the board, and actually probably has saved the U.S. economy in terms of increasing its output as we go forward. Next slide. Again, so looking forward. Next slide. So obviously AI is a theme of this presentation. And again, they could expect to see about a 4.4 trillion to the global economy, and 60 to 7% of workers' productivity could be saved through automation. Next slide. So obviously, there's some job loss that might be associated with that. Think elevator operators, but 83 million jobs are said to be lost, but we gain about 69 million, but we're going to lose about 14 million jobs in total. Next slide. So you can sort of see some of the areas where the biggest job losses, data entry to door-to-door salespeople are typically the things, but you can sort of see why these jobs might be lost. Obviously, there are some things that can be automated via AI. But looking at these things, you kind of see these jobs could be replaced by AI in the future. Next slide, please. Obviously, there's some gains. Obviously, there are some equipment operators, bus drivers, vocab teachers, machine repairers, those types of things. Thinking about sort of the driverless big rig, I'm sure some people might be concerned of looking at a truck driving on the highway with no one driving it versus the guy that might be driving it now. But nevertheless, perhaps automated driving is still far off in the future. Next slide. So as interest rates have risen, venture capital deals have decreased. So this is the fuel for startup companies. In the era of expensive money, not all deals are as good as they were when interest rates were 2%. So this perhaps is more discriminatory and does provide a better, sharper focus in terms of what companies are going to invest in. But we're seeing the number of deals has actually declined ongoing. Next slide. So no economic discussion would be complete without any kind of a discussion around climate change, and regardless of how you think it's being caused or whether it's caused man-made, it is here. We've just come off one of the hottest years since for a while, but we're seeing more and more of these billion-dollar disaster events are increasing the frequency in the U.S. So not only are we seeing more of them, but they're just more powerful. Next slide, please. You're looking at basically coastal flooding, more in our region here. Looking at the decade span of 20 years, excuse me, through 2010, coastal flooding was fairly low key, but once we get into 2010s, you can sort of see that coastal flooding did increase rather rapidly across the region, which means the challenges, right? So obviously, this is additional dollars that municipalities, state government, the federal government need to spend to mitigate against some of these issues. So, for example, in Ellicott City, it had two 100-year storms within 2 years of each other. So we're probably going to spend $150 million in infrastructure upgrades to basically ensure that, if we do have a storm, there could be still some flooding, but it won't be as bad as if we didn't have it. So all municipalities are now trying to harden themselves against, climate change. You look at Annapolis, they're trying to figure out how they can sort of prevent some of that coastal flooding from occurring. But again, those are dollars that could have been spent elsewhere, but they're now being spent to take care of these things. Next slide. So really, looking at the crystal ball, you can sort of see the headwinds in the economy and tailwinds. There are many more headwinds. Obviously, the ongoing war, the Mideast challenges, slowing of the world economy, rising interest rates, inflation that's kind of been a bit at abeyance. Volatility in the energy markets, especially as we enter into the winter. If gas prices kind of go up, that could actually cause people's pocketbook to be hurt. Banking system, as I mentioned, many banks have a significant portfolio of commercial backed mortgages in their portfolio. As a result of those things fall in value, that could impact their balance sheet. A divided Congress. We got one thing passed this yesterday. We still have many more issues to tackle. Supply chain challenges, though not as impactful as they were last year, and climate change. Obviously, we're seeing more impacts and more frequent and more severe. Tailwinds, strong labor market, and then a bit of a softening home prices. But as I mentioned, it is hardly anything to really write home about when prices have risen 30% and they drop, half a percentage point. Next slide. So turning to Maryland, just real briefly, Governor Moore has said we have all the assets, but none of the strategy. And you can sort of see that for a state that's rich in assets, that has, over, nearly 24 federal installations and facilities, our GDP was near the bottom in terms of growth when you consider basically in that same time period for the U.S. GDP grew at just over 2%, because again there's a bit of a lag between the data that we get for state level GDP versus for the national GDP. But nonetheless, so Maryland typically has been underperforming in terms of its overall economic activity. Next slide. So if you were to look at this slide pre-pandemic, it would look pretty remarkable. So healthcare, computer, and management were typically the top three pre-pandemic as well as post-pandemic. These three represent about 45% of all openings in Maryland in terms of job availability. And again, as we get older, we need more physical care, we need more nurse, more healthcare, and also we become a little bit dumber in our IT operations, a bit more fat-fingered. But even then, we're having telemedicine, we're doing more banking online, we're doing more government services online, more security, more to the cloud. All those things have really impacted and resulted in the need for more IT professionals as we go forward. Next slide. I can see that Maryland is eds, beds, meds, and beds. Obviously, Brian, you can put the Port of Baltimore in there as well. But government, which is both local, state, and federal government, is one of the larger employers in the state, followed by healthcare, professional and scientific technical services. This is where accounting firms are, lawyers, legal, engineering firms, all those things that even support our federal government installations. Retail, trade, and accommodations is our beds. This is where our stores, as well as our hotels and food services. And again, a significant amount of employment in there as well. Next slide. So Maryland's economy, obviously, we're seeing if the world slows down, Maryland could slow down. So think about the Port of Baltimore. It makes money as cargo comes in and cargo goes out. If there's a world slowdown, that slows down. That has an impact all the way from the port all the way up through Hagerstown and beyond in terms of affecting the supply chain up there. So there is that challenge here. And again, uncertainty around the federal budget. We did, obviously avert a shutdown, but that doesn't mean that uncertainty doesn't exist around the federal budget, especially for Maryland. Maryland structural deficit. So, we have heard that Maryland is going to see its deficit increase, and actually in 2028 should be a rather large number, which does mean that the state has to make some decisions about how it wants to fund certain things or not fund certain things. Population decline. Most recent census data shows that Maryland lost about 20,000 individuals, which is significant because obviously, with a structural deficit, what you want to do is you can either raise taxes, lower expenditures, or increase the number of people living in Maryland who pay more taxes, therefore avoiding the draconian thing of cutting spending or raising taxes. Affordability, while we tend to be a bit more affordable, our average home price is around the U.S. national average, about $300,000 plus. Energy costs can be rather expensive here. Banking, as I mentioned, that is an ongoing challenge given we have some small regional banks. Again, their exposure to some commercial-backed lending is not as severe as, say, some banks up in New York City who might have more on their books than our banks here. Labor force shortages continue to plague hospitality and eating, in addition to IT, health, and transportation. And next slide. And that's it. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Irani. We do have a few questions that came in during the course of your presentation. So let's get to some of those. This first one was posted before you started talking about what's happening on the Maryland side, but just wanted to see if you had any additional comments. The question is, Maryland's economy was slow to come back after COVID compared to other states. Have we returned to pre-COVID levels?
No.
Okay. Anything you want to elaborate on that at all, or are we?
I mean, we're
Oh,
still
we got
kind
it.
of, we're still showing shortages, especially in the hospitality area. There's still a lot of companies haven't come back fully. Obviously, you can sort of see the debacle with the school bus challenges here in Maryland. We don't have quite enough CDL drivers, so that's plaguing some of the areas. Obviously, industry, we're a very service-oriented state. In terms of basically IT is a large component of our economy. So many of those companies, many of those firms just didn't, weren't impacted. And so many companies also allow the workforce to remain at home. But we did face some challenges, especially in more service or more customer touching professions. Still haven't recovered.
All right. Another question here. Economists have been predicting a recession for some time that has not yet happened. And they said you've been presenting a lot of negative data and trends throughout the last hour. What is keeping the U.S. economy out of recession at this point?
Bubble gum and baling wire. Honestly, it is something that is perplexing. I mean, so obviously, firms are continuing to produce. Our goods are demanded. Consumers are still spending. That really is it. Consumers are still spending. They feel rather bullish on the economy. They may not be buying homes, but they're buying other things. They're buying services. They're traveling. So consumers are really the drivers that are kind of going on with the economy. We were predicting some sort of a soft landing, or not as soft as perhaps the Fed would want, but it seems that basically the economy seems to be defying expectations. I mean, looking at the job numbers are created, so there is, even in spite of all things going on, the U.S. economy is barreling on. Now, if you look at household surveys, many households don't feel that the economy is doing well, and part of that is every day when they drive their car, they see gas prices. And every week when they go grocery shopping, they see higher prices for the groceries. But when we look at the broader macro numbers of GDP and unemployment, all those numbers are moving in positive, in the right directions.
All right, very good. A couple of other questions here. Is Maryland losing retirees?
Well, yes, I suspect, so there's a couple of things, right? So there is no tax. There's still some income tax on retiree benefits who are non-military, and the weather is not as nice as Florida or other places, or Arizona. So it really is hard to sort of tease out. But some individuals find themselves, they live 51% of the time in Florida, so they become a Floridian, but they have grandkids up here, so they'll maintain a space up here. But yes, it is a challenge for us to retain population. As I mentioned, we lost 20,000 individuals.
All right, one other question here. Accounting, you had a slide earlier. Some of the jobs that were slated to lose people to new technologies like artificial intelligence, and accounting was one of them. How do you suggest that we human accountants prepare for that?
So one of the things is when you think about what automation can do, it can take basically menial, dull, repetitive tasks and kind of do it very quickly. So we start breaking down what part of the accounting part, again, looking for minutia of research. Again, they can provide the muscle and the research. They can kind of do some of the brute force work that might be done in many professions. Again, looking at the example of legal research, they can do a tremendous amount of research in a very quick time. However, I should caution that their work needs to be checked thoroughly, because there was a case where AI was allowed to generate some legal briefs, and they found that not only they had some great references, except they made those references up. So again, there will always be a need for someone to kind of check and see, is this really legit? So if it can't find something, it will infer and develop something that will fill the gap.
All right, the next question has to do with the recent announcement of the FBI headquarters being relocated to Maryland. The question is, doesn't that the location of FBI headquarters in PG County make us even more dependent on the U.S. Budget?
Well, so right now, 10% of Maryland's population works directly for the federal government, and about another 5 to 7% work indirectly as contractors. So we've always been, and I suspect that many of those people who work at the FBI live in Maryland and commute in. Now that perhaps the commute will be a little bit easier, but nonetheless, we are a very dependent state, much like Virginia. And again, the DMV zone, we are kind of tied together to the hip. And it is a challenge, especially when the government decides it wants to shut down.
All right, and it looks like we have one final question here. Not sure if you can elaborate on this, but your outlook for the Maryland's digital tax case.
I have no opinion on that.
That was a stretch, but wanted to ask it nonetheless. But Dr. Irani, thank you so much for being here. Certainly appreciate your insights. It's been an enlightening hour. So thank you very much for your time and your insights.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right. With that, folks, just a couple of minutes left. There are a couple of polling questions. I've reopened the last few polling questions here. We're always looking for suggestions for topics for future town hall meetings. So if you have any, feel free to chime in here. We would love to get your insights on some things that you want to know a little bit more about. Your biggest insights from today's town hall. Feel free to jot your thoughts down there as well. We have a few other quick slides here at the end just to let you know of some things coming up. Saving the date in May, Leadership Academy coming up. So bring your best and brightest young accounting professionals to our Leadership Academy. That's coming up May 15th and 16th. Don't forget the work of our MACPA Foundation. You can find out more at macpa.org/foundation. And a few other things. We've got that's actually passed. So I should have taken that one out. Sorry about that. Wanted to CPA Day coming up in January. Make sure that is on your radar screen, and want you to also please consider making a donation to our Political Action Committee. That's your voice in Maryland in front of the General Assembly. A few ways that you can do that right here. So please consider a donation, especially with General Assembly session coming up. We need all the help we can get in Annapolis, and communities. Don't forget to turn to our online communities for help and advice. macpa.org/connect is your home for all of that. Folks, that's about all the time we've got. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate your time here on this Wednesday afternoon. Have a great rest of your afternoon, a great rest of your week, and a relaxing and wonderful Thanksgiving. Thanks so much. Take care.